Here's a video for notes 5-3, greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor, to determine the greatest common factor, you need to make sure your polynomial is written in standard form, meaning the highest degree exponent first if there's only one variable. Your greatest common factor is always going to have the same sign as the leading term, meaning if it's positive, it's positive, if it's negative, it's negative. Then what you're going to do, there's basically a number and a variable component to your GCF usually. So to figure out the number component, what you're going to do is you're going to list out the factors of all the coefficients and find the largest common factor for all the coefficients, hence the name greatest common factor. And then your greatest common factor is going to have the same variable as a last term, which is either going to be the smallest exponent if it's written in standard form or your constant term. Once you find your GCF to factor it out, it's basically the distributive property in reverse. So we know distributive property is multiplication. In order to factor your GCF, you're going to use division essentially. So you're going to divide all the terms by the GCF. Whatever's left over goes inside the parentheses, and your GCF is written out in front of the parentheses. You should always check your final answer using multiplication. All right. So let's take a look at this example here. So we have negative 6x to the fourth plus 8x cubed minus 4x. So first of all, this is already written in standard form since we have our highest degree exponent here and then our lowest degree exponent here. Then we're going to look and see that our GCF is the same sign as our first term. So since our GCF, or since our first term is negative, that means my GCF needs to be negative. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out the number component of our GCF. So to do that, we're going to take our coefficients 6, 8, and 4, and we're going to list out the factors. So I like to list them out in pairs. 1 and 6 and 2 and 3 are the factors of 6. Then the factors of 8, we have 1 and 8, 2 and 4, and then we have factors of 4, which is going to be 1 and 4 and 2 and 2. So looking at our list, we're going to find the largest one, and the easiest way to do is just look at your smallest number, because the biggest our GCF could possibly be is a 4. So I see that there's a 4 here and a 4 here, but there's no 4 and 6, so that's not a common factor. So next number, let's look at 2. We have a 2 here, a 2 here, and 2 here. So that means 2 is going to be our greatest common factor in terms of the number. Okay, and lastly, we're going to look at our last term, because our GCF is going to be the same variable as our last term, and since our last term has an x, that means the greatest common factor in terms of variables is x. Because as we can see, if we were to expand this, this would be x times x times x times x, this would be x times x times x, and this would just be x. And the greatest that they all have in common is just one single x. So there's our GCF. So now to actually factor this, that's going to be one of our factors. So we're going to write that on the outside. So it's going to be negative 2x. And then to figure out what goes on the inside, we're going to divide every term by our GCF. So looking at the first one, negative 6 divided by negative 2 is a positive 3. And then in terms of our exponents, when we multiply, we add our exponents. When we divide, we subtract. So 4 minus 1 is 3. And then we have 8 divided by negative 2, which is going to be negative 4. And then we have 3 minus 1, which is 2, so x squared. Lastly, negative 4 divided by negative 2 is a positive 2. And then x to the first and x to the first is x to the 0. Basically, the x's are going to cancel out or make just a single one. So this is my final answer. I factored it. I've broken it apart into two factors, my GCF and the leftover. So we can always check our answer by using multiplication. So negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, and then we have x and x cubed, that's x to the fourth, so that checks out. Negative 2 times negative 4 is 8, x to the first and x squared is x cubed. Negative 2 times positive 2 is negative 4, and then we have an x, so that checks out. So since I checked my answer, we know that that answer is correct. All right, let's look at this harder example. The reason this is harder, not only the numbers are the numbers bigger, but we also have two variables. So in this case, we don't really need to worry about standard form. There are two variables, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. So to figure out our GCF, we look at the sign of our first number. And since it's positive, we know our GCF is going to be positive. To figure out the number that goes with our GCF, we're going to list out our factors of our numbers. So listing out our factors, 54, 63, and 36. So factors of 54 is going to be 1 and 54, 2 and 27, 3 and 18, 6 and 9, and I believe that's it. 54 divided by 8. Yeah, so that's it. Now we're going to do the same thing with 63. So 1 and 63. 2 doesn't go in. 63 divided by 3 is 21. So 3 and 21. Divided by 4 is a decimal. 5 doesn't go in. 6 doesn't. 7 and 9. And I believe that's it. And then my factors of 36. 1 and 36. 2 and 18. 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and then 6 and 6. All right, so now to find the greatest common factor, we're going to look at our smallest number and kind of go from there. So 63 doesn't go into any of these, so that doesn't work. 18 goes into 54, but doesn't go into 63, so it can't be 18. 12 doesn't work. It's only a factor of 36. What about 9? I see a 9. So since 9 goes into all three of those, I know my GCF is going to contain a 9. Okay, lastly, we're going to look at our variables. Well, we have two variables, so we need to look at both the m's and the n's. So if this were written in standard form, m to the 6th, m to the 7th, and m to the 5th, 5th is a highest degree or the lowest degree exponent, so it's going to be m to the 5th. And then in terms of n, well, notice that this second term here does not have an n, which means that's not a common factor, so we can't take out any n's. So that means my GCF is just going to be positive 9m to the 5th. Okay, so now to factor it, we know that the GCF is one of the factors, and now we're going to divide everything by 9m to the 5th. So 54 divided by 9 is 6, and then we subtract the exponents. M to the 6th and m to the 5th is just going to be an m. And since we're not taking out any n's, we're going to leave the n's. 63 divided by 9 is going to be, well, it's going to be negative 7 since this is a negative 63. And then we have m squared. And then we have 36 divided by n. 36 divided by 9 is 4. M to the 5th over m to the 5th, those cancel out. So I'm just with n cubed. Okay, so here's my final answer. And then we can double check by multiplying. So 9 times 6 is 54. M to the 5th and m is m to the 6th. And then we have n squared. So notice I'm checking the number and the variables. 9 times negative 7 is negative 63. M to the 5th and m squared is m to the 7th. 9 times 4 is 36. And then we have m to the 5th and n cubed. So since that all checks out, I know my final answer is correct. All right, so now let's look at a couple of the homework problems. So starting with number 3. So first thing I want to check to see that my polynomial is written in standard form. So 6, 5, 4, 3. It is. So now to factor out my GCF, I start with the sign. I know it's going to be negative since my leading term is negative. And now I'm going to list out my factors of my numbers. Well, the only factors, or the only coefficients I have are 20, 80, and 70. We don't need to list out the factors of 20 twice. So 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Factors of 80. And actually what you can do here is you can just list out the factors of the smallest number and kind of go from there to see if any of these numbers go into 80 and 70. That's actually the quicker way. Because we know that if it's a factor of 80 doesn't mean it's a factor of 20, but the biggest our GCF could be is the factors of 20. So starting with 20, 20 goes into 80, but 20 does not go into 70. 10 goes into 80, and 10 goes into 70. So it looks like 10 is going to be my part of my greatest common factor. Okay, lastly, we look at our lowest variable term. In this case, it's going to be v cubed. All right, so now to factor, we know that that's going to be one of my factors. So negative 10v cubed. And then to get the inside, we're going to divide everything by 10v cubed. Negative 10v cubed. So negative 20 divided by negative 10 is positive 2. And then subtract our exponents, so v cubed. 80 divided by negative 10 is negative 8. Subtract our exponents, v squared. Negative 20 divided by negative 10 is positive 2. Subtract our exponents. 70 divided by negative 10 is negative 7. And then if you do it right, then your final term inside your parentheses should be a constant, because you should be able to take out as many as there are in your last term. So v cubed over v cubed cancel each other out. They just equal 1, so we're just left with negative 7. To check our final answer, we're just going to check negative 10 times 2 is negative 20. V cubed is v6. Negative 10 times negative 8, positive 80. V to the third v squared is v to the fifth. Negative 10 times positive 2, negative 20. V cubed and v is v to the fourth. Negative 10 times negative 7 is positive 70. And then we have v cubed. All right, since that's all checked out, we know that that is the correct answer. All right, this one. So we have two variables again. So we don't need to worry about standard form, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. My GCF is going to be positive since my leading term is positive. Factors of 18 and 24. So my shortcut, I'm just going to list out my factors of 18. So there's my factors of 18. And then going off of this list, 18 does not go into 24. 9 does not go into 24. 6 goes into 24. So that means 6 is going to be part of my GCF. And then lastly, we're going to look at our variables. So we have to look at our x's and y's. So x to the fourth, x cubed, x to the fourth. So this is the smallest. And then we have our y terms. We have y to the 14th, y to the 15th, and y to the 12th. We're going to look for the smallest term. So there's my GCF. I know that that is one of my factors. And then we're going to divide everything by my GCF to get the inside. $18 divided by 6 is 3. Subtract our exponents. We get x and y squared. 18 divided by 6 is 3. Subtract our exponents. X cubed and x cubed cancel out. And then we have y to the 15th and y to the 12th, so that's y cubed. 24 divided by 6 is 4. Subtract our exponents, and our y to the 12th cancel out. So now just to check, 6 times 3, 18. X cubed times x is x to the 4th. Y to the 12th, y squared. It's y to the 14th. 6 times 3 is 18. We have x cubed, y to the 15th, because 12 plus 3 is 15. 6 times 4 is 24. X to the 4th. And then we have our y to the 12th. So since that all checks out with the original problem, we know that that is correct.